The doors of Elysian Autos swung open as Keanu Reeves stepped inside, dressed in a simple black t-shirt, faded jeans, and worn-out sneakers. The bright, polished showroom stretched before him, filled with gleaming luxury vehicles, lined up like trophies. The scent of fresh leather mixed with the faint aroma of coffee brewing in the customer lounge. Everything about the dealership screamed exclusivity, from the grand chandeliers that hung from the ceiling, to the pristine marble floors that reflected the glow of the overhead lighting. Keanu moved with ease, his sharp eyes scanning the room, taking in every detail, every interaction. He wasn't here as a celebrity nor as a billionaire, he was here as a customer, or at least that's what the staff assumed, and that was precisely what he wanted. As he approached the first row of cars, the faint murmurs of employees behind the sleek reception desk caught his attention. A tall woman with meticulously styled hair and a fitted navy blazer gave him a once-over before exchanging amused glances with her colleague. Zara, the senior sales associate, had been working at Elysian Autos for 5 years, long enough to know exactly who belonged in a place like this and who didn't. And to her, the man who had just walked in with his effortlessly casual attire and unpolished demeanor was clearly in the wrong place. She sighed and turned her attention away from him, deciding she had better things to do than entertain a window shopper who likely couldn't afford a single tire on these cars. Keanu wandered deeper into the showroom, pausing beside an elegant black Aston Martin. He ran his fingers along the sleek frame, appreciating the craftsmanship, when he noticed Zara finally making her way toward him, her posture stiff with impatience. "Excuse me, sir," she said, forcing a polite smile. "Can I help you with something?" The tone in her voice was the same one she used when dismissing people she deemed unworthy of her time. Keanu turned his gaze to her, his expression unreadable. "Yeah," he said casually. "I was looking to buy a car today." Zara barely contained the smirk tugging at her lips. It was always the ones who said they were buying today that never actually did. She crossed her arms, eyeing him as if he were a child playing dress-up. "Well," she said slowly, "these are some of the finest luxury vehicles in the world. Maybe I can direct you to something more suitable?" She tilted her head toward a small section where the more affordable models were displayed. Keanu studied her for a moment before nodding toward the high-end sports cars. "Actually, I was thinking something more like this," he said, tapping the hood of a sleek silver McLaren. Zara barely held back a scoff. "That's a very high-performance car," she said, her words dripping with skepticism. "Are you sure that's what you're looking for?" Her carefully chosen words were laced with doubt, the kind that suggested she didn't believe for a second that he was serious. Keanu simply smiled, his patience unwavering. "Why don't you tell me more about it?" Zara exhaled sharply, clearly irritated. She didn't have time for this. There were actual customers in the showroom, ones in designer suits, ones who smelled of money, ones worth her effort. And here she was, wasting time on a guy who was clearly out of his league. She forced a tight smile. "I think you'd be better off looking at something a little more in your price range. The McLaren starts at over $200,000, and honestly, I wouldn't want you to get your hopes up." The way she spoke, as if she were doing him a favor, sent a ripple of amusement through Keanu. He had dealt with arrogance before, had seen the way people sized up others based on appearance alone. But he wasn't here to argue, nor was he here to flaunt his wealth. He was here to see, to observe, who among his employees understood the true value of customer service, and who simply catered to power when it suited them. He nodded thoughtfully. "I see," he said, glancing back at the car. "And what if I wanted to buy it right now?" Zara let out a short, almost condescending laugh. "Sir, look," she said, her voice barely masking her annoyance. "Elysian Autos is an exclusive dealership. We cater to a certain clientele. Maybe this isn't the right place for you." Keanu tilted his head slightly. "And what kind of clientele would that be?" Zara hesitated as if realizing she had overstepped, but instead of backtracking, she doubled down. "People who don't just walk in off the street expecting to buy something they can't afford," she said smoothly, folding her arms again. Keanu studied her for a long moment before finally offering a small, knowing smile. "Interesting," he mused. "Tell me something, Zara. Is the owner of this place available?" Her expression shifted slightly, caught off guard by the sudden question. Then amusement flickered across her features. "The owner," she repeated, shaking her head. "I'm afraid that's not how things work here. The owner doesn't just show up unannounced." She let out another short laugh. "Trust me, he's way too busy to deal with walk-ins." Keanu chuckled lightly, as if entertained by the irony of it all. "Is that so?" he asked. pulling his phone out of his pocket. Zara rolled her eyes as he casually tapped on his screen, clearly indulging in some kind of pointless bluff. She turned to her colleague at the front desk and muttered something under her breath, shaking her head with a smirk. "What a joke," she whispered, making sure Keanu couldn't hear. Except he did, and he wasn't bothered in the slightest. He lifted the phone to his ear as it rang once, twice, then connected. "Lysander," Keanu said smoothly. "Hey, I need you to come down to the dealership. Something interesting is happening." The second the name left his lips, Zara's confident smirk faltered. Her posture stiffened slightly, though she tried to mask it. The name Lysander was not one that employees took lightly. Lysander was the regional director, the highest-ranking figure directly beneath the owner himself. If Keanu knew him, then this wasn't just some random customer playing games, and as Keanu slid his phone back into his pocket, offering Zara nothing but an easy smile, a slow wave of dread began to settle in her stomach. She had just made a mistake, a big mistake, and she had no idea just how much worse it was about to get. Zara stood frozen, her polished confidence beginning to crack as the weight of Keanu's phone call settled over her. She stole a glance at her colleagues behind the front desk, hoping for reassurance, but all she found were equally puzzled and nervous expressions. The name Lysander carried weight, and for someone who dressed like Keanu to use it so casually sent a ripple of unease through the room. She tried to shake it off, composing herself with a sharp inhale. There was no way this man was anyone important. Probably just another pretentious customer who thought he could play power games to get attention. And yet, something about the way he stood, the ease in his posture, the calm, unreadable smile on his lips, it unsettled her. Keanu, meanwhile, appeared utterly unaffected by the shift in atmosphere. He simply slipped his phone back into his pocket and let his gaze drift across the room, taking in the gleaming showroom, the employees now eyeing him with wary curiosity, the growing tension in Zara's shoulders. He could feel the silent calculations running through her head, searching for a way to regain control of the situation. He had seen it countless times before, in different places, under different circumstances. People like Zara never questioned their assumptions until they had no choice, and he was giving her that choice now. After what felt like an eternity, Zara forced a laugh, though it sounded hollow. "Right," she scoffed, tilting her head. "So you just happen to be friends with Lysander, the regional director? That's convenient." Her words dripped with sarcasm, but the flicker of doubt in her eyes betrayed her. Keanu met her gaze with an effortless coolness, offering nothing in response. Let her sit in it, he thought. Let her question herself. The doors of the dealership swung open, and Lysander himself strode inside, his sharp suit and purposeful stride exuding authority. The air shifted instantly, employees straightened, their casual postures snapping to attention. Conversations hushed, and every set of eyes turned toward the man who, until now, had only been a distant figure looming over their careers. Zara's smirk vanished, the color drained from her face as she stiffened, realization creeping in like a slow, cruel whisper. This wasn't a joke. Lysander scanned the room, his gaze landing on Keanu with the recognition of a man greeting an equal. Without hesitation, he walked straight toward him and extended a hand. "Keanu," he said smoothly, a small but unmistakable note of respect in his voice. "I didn't know you'd be dropping by today." Zara's stomach dropped. She felt her breath hitch, her world tilting as the pieces came together in a horrifying, inescapable truth. Keanu. As in Keanu Reeves. As in the billionaire owner of Elysian Autos, the very man whose dealership she had just mocked, dismissed, and condescended to. Her limbs turned to lead. The realization hit her so hard it was almost physical. Keanu shook Lysander's hand, his easy smile never wavering. "I wanted to see things from a different perspective," he said, glancing around the dealership before letting his gaze land directly on Zara. "You know, get a sense of how the team interacts with customers when they don't think anyone important is watching." The weight of his words crushed her. Every syllable felt like a blade against her pride, slicing through the arrogance she had worn like armor. Anyone important. Her breath came shallow as she replayed every word, every dismissive glance, every moment of condescension she had so proudly displayed in the last 10 minutes. The disbelief, the mocking laughter, the way she had looked at him like he was nothing. Lysander's expression darkened as he took in the tension between Keanu and Zara. His gaze flicked to her, then back to Keanu. "I take it you weren't given the warmest welcome?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Keanu let out a small chuckle, but there was no amusement in it. Only something far more cutting. Let's just say I wasn't exactly encouraged to make a purchase, he said, his voice light but carrying an unmistakable edge. Zara swallowed hard. She wanted to disappear. The room felt suffocating now. She could feel the stares of her co-workers, the silent judgment, the whispered shock. No one had expected this, least of all her. The very man she had dismissed as unworthy now stood before her, holding all the power. And worse, he wasn't even angry. That made it 10 times worse. Lysander exhaled sharply, rubbing his temple before turning his attention to Zara, his expression unreadable. Zara, he said, his voice low but firm, care to explain why our owner wasn't treated with the same level of professionalism as any other customer? She couldn't speak. Her mouth opened but no words came. What could she say? That she had judged him unfairly? That she had let her own arrogance get in the way of doing her job? There was no excuse, no way to justify what had just happened. Her body felt like it had been drained of all warmth, leaving only the icy grip of humiliation clinging to her skin. Keanu, watching her carefully, finally broke the silence. "Let's have a meeting," he said smoothly, his voice calm but unshakable. "I think it's time we talk about how we treat people in this dealership." Lysander nodded, already turning toward the conference room. The other employees exchanged nervous glances before quickly moving to follow. Zara, feeling her legs barely supporting her, forced herself to move, though every step felt like walking to her own execution. As they made their way across the showroom, Keanu spoke once more, his voice just loud enough for Zara to hear. "You know," he mused, "it's funny how quickly people change when power shifts." The words burned through her not because they were cruel, but because they were true, and she had no choice now but to face it. This was only the beginning. The conference room was silent, the weight of tension pressed against the walls, thick and suffocating. Employees sat stiffly in their seats, some nervously glancing at one another, others keeping their gazes fixed firmly on the polished table in front of them. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning, an eerie contrast to the chaos of thoughts running through their minds. No one had ever seen a meeting called this suddenly, especially not by the owner himself, and no one, not a single person in the room, had expected Keanu Reeves to be that owner. Zara sat near the end of the long conference table, her stomach twisted into knots. She had spent the last few minutes trying to compose herself, but nothing could undo the sheer humiliation she had endured. It still burned hot beneath her skin, shame curling in the pit of her stomach like a slow-spreading fire. This wasn't just a bad day. This was a disaster of her own making. Keanu sat at the head of the table, exuding a quiet authority that was even more unnerving than outright anger. He wasn't ranting, wasn't yelling, wasn't making a spectacle of his power. No, he was simply watching, observing, letting the weight of the moment sink in for everyone in the room. His fingers rested against the table, his posture relaxed, but his presence commanded attention in a way that no one dared to challenge. Lysander stood beside him, his expression unreadable, though the sharpness in his eyes left no doubt that he was just as displeased by what had transpired. He cleared his throat before finally breaking the silence. "I don't think I need to tell anyone here why we're in this meeting," he said, his voice even but carrying the force of a man who expected accountability. A few employees shifted in their seats, casting nervous glances toward Zara, but no one spoke. Keanu finally leaned forward, lacing his fingers together. "I came here today," he said, his voice calm but unwavering, "because I wanted to see for myself how this dealership operates. Not through numbers, not through reports, but through experience." His gaze swept the room, taking in the uncomfortable expressions of the staff. "And what I experienced was enlightening." Zara felt the heat rise in her face. She knew the next words would be about her. There was no avoiding it. Keanu turned slightly, his gaze settling on her. "Zara," he said, his tone even, yet carrying an undeniable weight, "would you like to explain what happened out there?" Every pair of eyes in the room turned toward her. The pressure was suffocating, crushing. Zara swallowed hard, feeling her pulse thudding against her ribs. What could she possibly say? Lie? No. Keanu had already lived the truth. Make excuses? That would only make her look even worse. Apologize? But would that even mean anything now? After a long, painful pause, she finally forced herself to speak. Her voice cracked so she cleared her throat and tried again. "I misjudged you," she admitted, her voice quieter than she intended. "I made an assumption based on appearances, and that was wrong." Keanu didn't react immediately. He simply studied her, as if trying to decide whether her words held sincerity or if they were merely spoken out of fear. "You misjudge me," he repeated thoughtfully. Then, after a beat, he asked, "And what about everyone else?" Zara frowned slightly. "What?" Keanu's expression remained neutral, but there was something sharp beneath the surface. "Do you think I'm the only customer you've ever dismissed because of how they looked?" Zara's stomach dropped. She felt exposed. Like every moment of arrogance, every silent judgment she had made over the years was suddenly laid bare for everyone in the room to see. She didn't have an answer. Because she knew the truth. Keanu let the silence stretch. Let her sit in it. Then, after a long moment, he leaned back slightly. "Zara, I didn't come here today to humiliate you," he said. "That's not my style. But what happened out there wasn't just about me. It was about the culture of this dealership, and that's something I can't ignore." Lysander nodded, stepping forward slightly. "We're in the business of selling luxury cars, and luxury isn't just about the product, it's about the experience. Customers walk in here expecting respect. They expect professionalism, regardless of what they look like or how they dress." His gaze hardened slightly. "If we fail to give them that, we don't just lose sales, we lose reputation." The words hit hard, the weight of reputation, of image. It was everything Zara had prided herself on, and now, in one afternoon, she had become the very example of what not to be. Keanu exhaled, his voice taking on a gentler tone now. "Look, I get it, we all make mistakes, and we all have biases, whether we like to admit them or not." He leaned forward slightly. "But the difference between good employees and great ones is that great ones recognize their mistakes and learn from them." The room remained silent. The message was clear. Zara had a choice now. She could defend herself or she could own it. Her throat felt tight, but she forced herself to nod. "I understand," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I was wrong, and I don't want to be that kind of employee." Keanu studied her again, then nodded slightly. "Good." He let his gaze sweep across the rest of the staff. "And what about the rest of you?" he asked, his voice carrying the weight of expectation. "Because this isn't just about one person. It's about the standard we set in this dealership." A few employees nodded, some looking ashamed, others thoughtful. One of the younger salesmen hesitated before speaking up. I think we've all made the same mistake at some point," he admitted. "I mean, we're always told to focus on high-value clients, but maybe we forget that value isn't something you can see at first glance." Keanu's expression softened slightly. "Exactly." He exhaled, leaning back in his chair. "So here's what's going to happen." His tone was firm but fair. "Every single employee in this dealership is going to go through customer service training. Not just for high-end clients, for everyone." He looked at Zara directly. "And you're going to be at the front of that change." Zara blinked. She had expected to be fired, but instead, this? She hesitated, then swallowed hard and nodded. "I understand." Keanu nodded, then stood. Good. He didn't offer a lecture, didn't drag out the moment. He had made his point and he was moving forward. Meeting's over. As everyone filed out, Zara remained seated for a moment, letting everything sink in. She had been given a second chance. Now it was up to her not to waste it. The meeting had ended, but its impact lingered long after the employees left the conference room. The atmosphere in the dealership felt different now, heavier. Conversations were quieter, movements more careful, and an unspoken tension sat between colleagues who now second-guessed how they had treated customers in the past. Zara, however, felt the weight of it the most. She sat at her desk, still reeling from the events that had unfolded. She should have been fired. That was what she had expected. But instead, Keanu had given her a second chance. And that, in some ways, felt even heavier than losing her job, because now she had to prove something. To Keanu, to the dealership, to herself. Her fingers drummed against the polished surface of her desk as she stared at the floor, her mind replaying every moment from earlier. She had been so sure of herself, so convinced that she could read people, and yet, the very man she had dismissed as unworthy of her time had been the most powerful person in the room, the owner, the billionaire. A soft knock at her desk made her jolt slightly. She looked up to see Lysander. His usual composed expression was still intact, but there was something different in his gaze. Not just disappointment, but curiosity. "You still processing everything?" he asked, his voice measured. Zara exhaled sharply, shaking her head. Processing is an understatement, she muttered. I humiliated myself today. Lysander crossed his arms, tilting his head slightly. You made a mistake, a bad one, but you were given a chance to correct it. The real question is, what are you going to do with that chance? That was the question, wasn't it? Zara let her gaze drift toward the showroom, where a few employees were assisting customers. She watched as one of the newer sales associates, a woman named Mara, greeted a middle-aged man in simple clothing. There was no hesitation in her approach, no judgment in her eyes, no arrogance. Zara sighed. I don't know where to start, she admitted. Keanu wants me to be at the front of this change, but how am I supposed to change overnight? Lysander gave her a look that was both sharp and understanding. You don't have to change overnight, but you do have to start. And that starts with every single interaction you have from this point forward. He nodded toward the showroom floor. So, start now. Zara followed his gaze, her stomach twisting slightly as she realized what he was implying. There was a customer standing near the luxury sedans, alone, browsing. And like before, he didn't exactly look like he belonged. His jeans were a little worn, his sneakers slightly scuffed, his jacket not designer. And yet, unlike before, Zara hesitated before jumping to conclusions. Lysander stepped aside, waiting. The ball was in her court now. Would she repeat her mistake, or would she finally do what she should have done all along? Taking a deep breath, Zara stood. She approached the man, smoothing her blazer as she did. Her heart was beating fast, not because she was nervous about the sale, but because this moment, was her real test. The man noticed her approaching and glanced up. He gave a small nod, as if expecting another dismissive greeting, another half-hearted attempt at customer service. But this time Zara smiled. Not a forced, professional smile, a real one. Good afternoon, sir, she said, keeping her tone warm, genuine. Welcome to Elysian Autos. My name is Zara. Let me know if there's anything I can help you with. The man looked surprised, as if he hadn't expected to be spoken to like an actual valued customer. He nodded slowly, then turned toward the car he had been admiring. Yeah, actually, I've been looking for something comfortable for long drives. I do a lot of cross-country traveling. Zara nodded, already forming suggestions in her head. Then you might want to check out the features on this model, she said, gesturing toward the car beside them. It has one of the most comfortable interiors in the lineup, with advanced cruise control and lane assistance, perfect for long trips. The man raised a brow, intrigued, interested. Zara felt something shift inside her. This moment felt different from all her past sales interactions, because for the first time in a long time she wasn't focusing on the sale, she was focusing on the person. Lysander watched from a distance, his lips curling slightly. Zara didn't need him to tell her she had made the right choice, she already knew. That night, when the dealership closed and Zara sat in her car, she let herself exhale. She had spent years believing that she knew everything, that she could read people, that she could tell who was worth her time and who wasn't. But today, she had learned the biggest lesson of all. Respect isn't just for the people who look like they deserve it. It's for everyone. The following morning, Zara arrived at Elysian Autos with a different mindset than before. Something had changed. She wasn't just going through the motions of her job anymore, she was watching herself, paying attention to every reaction, every assumption, every instinct. She had spent years thinking she could read people, that she could tell, at first glance, who was serious about buying and who was just wasting time, but yesterday proved her entire philosophy was flawed. And the worst part? It wasn't just about sales, it was about respect. Walking across the showroom floor, she saw Keanu standing near the entrance, speaking with Lysander. They weren't dressed for business. Keanu, as always, had that effortless ease about him, hands in his pockets, wearing dark jeans and a plain t-shirt. Lysander, while more polished, looked just as casual. If Zara hadn't known who they were, she might have assumed they were just two regular guys stopping in to browse. And that realization struck her hard. How many people had she misjudged before? How many deals had she lost because of her own bias? She took a deep breath and approached them. Keanu noticed her first, his expression unreadable but not unkind. "Morning," he greeted smoothly. Zara swallowed her pride and nodded. "Good morning, Mr. Reeves." She hesitated, then forced herself to say the words she knew needed to be said. "I just wanted to thank you for giving me another chance." Keanu studied her for a moment, then tilted his head slightly. "Are you thanking me because you mean it, or because you think that's what I want to hear?" The question caught her off guard. Zara's mouth opened, then closed. She knew the answer. "I mean it," she said, her voice quieter than usual. I didn't realize how much I was judging people. I thought I was being efficient, but I was actually just being unfair." Keanu gave a slow nod, his gaze still unreadable. She couldn't tell if he believed her yet. "Oh," he said, crossing his arms, "tell me what you're going to do about it." Zara blinked. "What do you mean?" "You're not the first person to judge someone unfairly," Keanu said casually, "and you won't be the last. But recognizing the problem isn't enough. What matters is what you do next." Zara felt that statement hit something deep inside her. What she did next? "I'm going to do better," she said firmly. "I already started yesterday." She glanced toward the front of the dealership, where the customer she had helped the day before was signing paperwork for his new car. "I didn't treat him like a waste of time. I treated him like a customer, like a person." Keanu's lips quirked into the smallest of smiles. "Good," he said simply. "Now keep doing that." Zara exhaled in relief. It wasn't a grand speech, but she felt lighter after saying it. Maybe, just maybe, she was actually on the right path. But she knew words meant nothing if her actions didn't back them up. As the day moved forward, Zara kept a close eye on how she handled each customer. She made an active effort to be patient, to listen, to avoid jumping to conclusions. And while it felt unnatural at first, by the afternoon, she realized she wasn't even forcing it anymore. Then, just before closing time, another test came. A woman entered the dealership, early 40s, dressed in an old sweater and faded jeans. Her hair was pulled into a loose ponytail, and her shoes had visible wear. A few months ago, Zara wouldn't have even approached her. But now... She straightened and walked over, offering the woman a genuine smile. "Hi there, welcome to Elysian Autos. My name is Zara. How can I help you today?" The woman looked almost surprised at being approached so quickly. "Oh, I was just looking, honestly. My son just started college and I need something reliable. I don't need anything fancy, but..." She hesitated. "I also don't want to feel like I'm buying a junk car." Zara nodded, really listening. "That makes sense," she said warmly. "You want something dependable but not too flashy. I think I have a few models that might be exactly what you're looking for. Can I show you some options?" The woman blinked, then smiled. "That would be great." And just like that, Zara had changed. She hadn't forced it, hadn't faked it, she had just treated someone with respect. Lysander had been right. Change wasn't overnight. It happened one moment at a time. As she led the woman to the section with budget-friendly but quality options, she caught sight of Keanu watching from across the room. He wasn't smiling, but there was something in his eyes, approval. And somehow that meant more than anything. As Keanu sat at the head of the long conference table, the air in the room was thick with tension. Every employee, including Zara, sat stiffly in their seats, some nervously shifting while others exchanged glances filled with unease. The reality of the situation had sunk in. The man they had dismissed so easily was now in control of their futures. The silence was almost suffocating, broken only by the rhythmic tapping of Keanu's fingers against the smooth surface of the table. His expression remained unreadable, his gaze calm but sharp, scanning the faces of the people who had unknowingly revealed their true colors to him. Lysander stood at his side, arms crossed, watching the employees who had spent the morning treating their billionaire boss like a nuisance. Zara, who had been so smug and condescending just hours ago, was now sitting with her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her normally confident posture had wilted, and her mind raced with regret. Every snide remark, every dismissive glance, and every assumption she had made about Keanu replayed in her head. She wanted to disappear, to sink into the chair and melt into nothingness, but there was nowhere to hide. She knew an apology wouldn't be enough, not after the way she had treated him. Keanu let the silence linger a little longer before finally speaking, his voice smooth but firm, carrying an authority that didn't need to be forced. "So," he began, leaning forward slightly, "I walked in here today as a regular customer, looking to see how my dealership operates when no one is looking. What I experienced was..." He paused, his gaze flicking to Zara before sweeping across the rest of the employees, eye-opening. A few of the staff swallowed hard, their faces tightening with discomfort. Zara clenched her fists under the table, her heart pounding as she anticipated what was coming next. Keanu continued, his tone never rising but carrying weight with every word. I was dismissed, judged, looked down upon because of the way I was dressed, because I didn't fit the image of someone worthy of respect in this dealership. He let the words settle, watching as a few of them shifted uncomfortably in their seats. And the worst part? This wasn't just about me. I guarantee that if I had been any other customer who didn't look the part, they would have received the same treatment. Zara sucked in a shaky breath, her stomach twisting with shame. She had prided herself on being a top employee, on being someone who understood people, and yet she had failed spectacularly in the most humiliating way possible. She wanted to interrupt, to defend herself, to explain that she didn't mean it the way it came off, but deep down she knew that was a lie. She had meant it exactly as it had come out, and now she was paying the price for her arrogance. Keanu let his fingers drum against the table once before he continued, his gaze never wavering. "Tell me something," he said, directing the question toward the entire room but making sure Zara felt the weight of it the most. "How many potential customers have walked through those doors and left without buying a car, not because they couldn't afford it, but because they were made to feel like they didn't belong?" No one answered. The silence stretched on, heavier than before. No one dared to meet his gaze. Keanu exhaled through his nose, nodding slightly as if their silence was answer enough. "I built my career on treating people with respect. That is the foundation of everything I do. Yet, today I walked into my own business and saw my employees treating customers based on their personal biases rather than their merit." He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "That ends today." A nervous ripple went through the room. Some employees looked down at the table, others looked to Lysander, as if hoping he would intervene, but there was no escape from Keanu's judgment. Zara finally gathered the courage to speak. Her voice was quieter than usual, lacking its usual sharpness. "Mr. Reeves," she started, her throat dry. I know I was wrong. I should have treated you better. Treated every customer better. I wasn't thinking." Keanu held up a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. "You were thinking, Zara," he corrected her calmly. "You made a choice. You assumed. And you acted on that assumption without hesitation." He didn't say it with anger, but his words cut sharper than any raised voice ever could. Zara swallowed, nodding quickly. "You're right," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have no excuse. I'm sorry." Keanu studied her for a moment before responding. "Apologies are words," he said simply. "What matters is whether you choose to change." A long pause stretched between them, and for the first time, Zara felt genuinely uncertain about her future. Would he fire her? Would she be given a chance to prove herself? Keanu straightened, his tone shifting slightly. "Effective immediately, this dealership is implementing a new customer service policy," he announced. "Every employee, no matter their position, will undergo mandatory training on fair treatment, bias awareness, and proper customer service etiquette. If you want to work here, you will treat every single person who walks through those doors with the respect they deserve. No exceptions." The employees nodded quickly, some out of genuine agreement, others out of fear of losing their jobs. Keanu's gaze landed on Zara again. "You, specifically," he said, making her sit up even straighter, "will be working directly with Lysander on improving our customer experience model. Consider this your second chance." Zara's eyes widened in shock. "You're keeping me?" Keanu's expression remained neutral. "I don't believe in throwing people away over one mistake, but I do believe in accountability. If you want to stay, you'll earn it." Zara nodded rapidly, her chest rising and falling with relief. "I will, I promise." Keanu pushed back from the table and stood up, signaling that the meeting was over. "Good, then let's see if you mean it." Without another word, he turned and walked toward the exit, leaving behind a room of humbled employees who had just learned a lesson they would never forget. Lysander followed him out, and as Zara sat there, replaying everything in her mind, she knew this wasn't just about keeping her job, it was about becoming the kind of person who truly deserved it. The employees remained seated even after Keanu left the conference room, a heavy silence blanketing the space. No one dared to speak, still processing what had just happened. Zara sat motionless, her fingers interlocked so tightly that her knuckles turned white. The realization of how close she had come to losing everything weighed down on her chest like a stone. She had spent years climbing the ranks at Elysian Autos, believing herself to be one of the best, yet in a single day her arrogance had nearly undone everything. Worse still, she had been given a second chance, not because she deserved it, but because Keanu Reeves had chosen to give it to her. Lysander finally cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "You all heard Mr. Reeves," he said, his voice sharp and authoritative. "The way we do things here is changing, effective immediately. This isn't just a wake-up call for Zara, it's for everyone. We've all been guilty of making assumptions about customers, prioritizing appearances over professionalism. That ends today." Zara felt the weight of every pair of eyes in the room flickering toward her. She could feel their judgment, their quiet relief that she had been the one in the spotlight instead of them. Some of them had likely done the same thing she had, maybe not as openly, maybe not as blatantly, but she was the one who had made a fool of herself in front of their billionaire boss. She was the one who had to answer for it now. Lysander continued, pacing along the length of the conference table. "There will be no more turning people away because they don't look the part. No more dismissing potential customers because of their clothing or their mannerisms. Every person who walks through those doors deserves the same level of service, whether they're dressed in a $1,000 suit or jeans and a hoodie." He stopped walking and turned his gaze toward Zara. "That includes you." She flinched slightly but nodded. "I understand," she said, her voice quieter than usual. "I won't make the same mistake again." Lysander studied her for a moment before nodding. "Good. Because from this point forward I'll be watching, Mr. Reeves will be watching, and if you slip up there won't be a third chance." Zara swallowed the lump in her throat. "I get it. I'll prove myself." Lysander took one last sweeping glance around the room, making sure his message had sunk in before dismissing everyone. The employees quickly filed out, their murmurs filling the hallway as they whispered about what had just transpired. Zara remained in her chair for a few extra seconds, taking a deep breath before rising to her feet. As she walked toward the door, she could feel her own footsteps dragging, as if her body resisted moving forward. Shame clung to her like an invisible weight. She had a long way to go to fix what she had broken. Over the next few days, Zara forced herself to change. It wasn't easy. Every interaction she had with a customer felt like a test, and she was painfully aware that everyone from her coworkers to Lysander was waiting for her to slip. She could feel their skepticism, their quiet doubt that she was truly capable of turning things around. And maybe they had a point. It wasn't like a switch had flipped in her mind overnight. The habit of judging customers based on their appearance had been ingrained in her for so long that it took effort to undo it. The first real challenge came on a Tuesday afternoon. The showroom was moderately busy, and Zara was going through the motions of her new training, making sure to greet every potential buyer with the same level of enthusiasm. That's when she noticed a man entering the dealership, wearing a faded t-shirt and cargo pants. His sneakers were scuffed and his hair was slightly unkempt. A week ago, she wouldn't have given him a second glance, would have brushed him off like she had Keanu, but this time, she caught herself. She squared her shoulders and took a deep breath before approaching. "Good afternoon, sir," she said with a polite smile. "Welcome to Elysian Autos. How can I assist you today?" The man seemed slightly surprised but nodded. "Yeah, I'm looking for something reliable, not too flashy, but something with power under the hood." Zara listened intently, nodding along as she led him toward a selection of vehicles. She asked him the right questions, ones she had once ignored in favor of sizing up a customer's worth based on their wardrobe. As they talked, she learned he was an engineer who had just received a major promotion at his firm. He wasn't showy about his wealth, but he was more than capable of affording one of the dealership's high-end models. By the end of the conversation, he had his eye on one of their newest releases, a car that cost nearly six figures. As she finalized the paperwork, Zara glanced up and saw Keanu standing near the entrance, watching the interaction unfold. Her stomach tightened instinctively, but this time, it wasn't out of fear, it was something else. Something closer to determination. She finished the sale and thanked the customer, genuinely pleased to have helped him find what he was looking for. Keanu approached just as the man left, his hands casually in his pockets. He didn't say anything at first, just gave her a knowing look. Then, with a small nod of approval, he said, "I see you're learning." Zara exhaled, feeling some of the tension ease from her shoulders. "I meant what I said," she replied. "I want to do better." Keanu studied her for a moment longer before offering a faint smile. "Then keep at it." She nodded, understanding that while today was a step forward, her redemption wasn't complete yet. It would take time to earn back the trust she had lost, not just from Keanu, but from her coworkers, from future customers, and most importantly, from herself. As Keanu turned to leave, Zara realized something important. This wasn't just about keeping her job or proving a point. It was about becoming the kind of person she should have been all along. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was on the right path. Zara woke up the next morning with a new sense of determination. She had spent the past few days proving to herself and everyone else at Elysian Autos that she was capable of change, but she knew the real test wasn't over. Her interactions with customers had improved, her attitude had shifted, and she had begun seeing people beyond their clothing or first impressions. But deep down, a part of her still feared that it wasn't enough. That Keanu Reeves, her billionaire boss, had only given her a second chance out of kindness, not because he truly believed in her. When she arrived at the dealership, she was greeted by her coworkers with a mixture of quiet acknowledgement and lingering doubt. Some had begun warming up to her again, seeing that she was making a real effort. Others remained skeptical, waiting for her to slip. She couldn't blame them. Respect wasn't something that could be demanded, it had to be earned, and after everything she had done, she would have to work twice as hard to prove herself. By midday, the dealership was buzzing with customers. Zara remained focused, greeting every visitor with the same level of professionalism she had once reserved only for those she assumed were wealthy. She made sure to listen, to engage, and most importantly, to treat everyone with respect, regardless of how they looked or dressed. It wasn't easy, but with each genuine interaction, she felt herself becoming a better version of who she had once been. Then, a new challenge arrived. A woman walked in, dressed in worn jeans and an oversized sweater. Her sneakers were old and she carried a small, battered purse that looked like it had seen better days. She wandered into the showroom cautiously, her eyes scanning the cars but never settling on one for too long. Zara noticed some of her colleagues glance at the woman, then quickly turn their attention elsewhere. A few months ago, Zara might have done the same, but now she saw things differently. Taking a deep breath, she approached with a warm smile. "Good afternoon, ma'am. Welcome to Elysian Autos. Is there anything I can help you with today?" The woman looked startled, as if she hadn't expected to be approached. "Oh, I'm just looking," she said hesitantly. "Of course," Zara replied, maintaining her friendly tone. "Take your time. If you need any help or have any questions, I'll be right here." For a moment, the woman seemed unsure, as if debating whether she should say more. Then, with a small nod, she pointed toward a sleek black sedan near the center of the showroom. "That's a beautiful car." Zara followed her gaze and nodded. "It really is. It's one of our newest models. Smooth handling, great mileage, and a really comfortable ride. Would you like to take a closer look?" The woman hesitated, then finally stepped forward. "I've always wanted a car like this," she admitted, running her fingers lightly along the vehicle's hood. "I don't know if I can afford it, but I just wanted to see it up close." Zara smiled, sensing the woman's quiet dream. "Would you like to sit inside, get a feel for it?" The woman's eyes widened. "Really? I can?" "Of course," Zara said, opening the door for her. "Go ahead." The woman slid into the driver's seat carefully, as if she didn't quite believe she was allowed to be there. She ran her hands over the steering wheel, a small smile forming on her lips. Zara stood by patiently, not pressuring her, not rushing her, just giving her the space to enjoy the moment. Then, as if snapping out of a daydream, the woman shook her head. "I shouldn't be wasting your time," she said, starting to get out of the car. "I probably can't even—" "Take your time," Zara interrupted gently. "You're not wasting my time, that's what I'm here for." The woman looked at her, searching her face for any hint of mockery or insincerity, but Zara meant every word. Slowly, the woman nodded and settled back into the seat, a mixture of gratitude and disbelief in her expression. Unbeknownst to Zara, someone was watching the entire exchange. Keanu Reeves stood near the entrance of the dealership, his hands in his pockets, observing with quiet approval. He had arrived an hour earlier but hadn't announced himself, wanting to see for himself whether Zara had truly changed or if her good behavior was just a temporary act. But now, as he watched her treat this woman with the same patience and respect that she would have given a high-profile buyer, he knew she had learned, and she had grown. As the woman finally stepped out of the car and thanked Zara for her kindness, Keanu decided it was time to make his presence known. He walked toward them, his steps silent but purposeful. Zara noticed him just as he reached her side, and for a split second panic flashed across her face. "Mr. Reeves," she said, standing a little straighter. Keanu offered her a small smile before turning to the woman. "It's a beautiful car, isn't it?" he said. The woman nodded shyly. "Yes. I've always loved this model." Keanu glanced at Zara before turning back to the woman. "How about we make that dream a reality?" he said simply. Both Zara and the woman stared at him in shock. "What do you mean?" the woman asked cautiously. Keanu pulled out his wallet and handed Zara a black credit card. "I'd like to buy this car for her." The woman's hands flew to her mouth. No, I couldn't accept that." Keanu chuckled. "It's a gift. Consider it a reminder that good things happen when you least expect them." Tears welled up in the woman's eyes as she covered her mouth, unable to process the moment. Zara, still in disbelief, hesitated before finally nodding and taking the card. Keanu then turned to Zara, his gaze steady. "I came here today to see if you had truly changed, and you have. You treated this woman with kindness without making assumptions about what she could or couldn't afford. That's exactly the kind of culture I want to see in this dealership." Zara swallowed hard, emotions swelling in her chest. "Thank you for giving me a second chance," she said quietly. Keanu placed a hand on her shoulder, his expression kind but firm. "A second chance is only as good as what you do with it. Keep proving that you deserve it." As Keanu finalized the purchase, the woman sobbed with gratitude, thanking him over and over. Zara, standing beside them, felt something shift inside her. Something real, something permanent. She had learned a lesson that would stay with her forever. As Keanu prepared to leave, he glanced back at Zara one last time. "Good work today," he said with a nod. And for the first time in a long time, Zara felt proud, not just of keeping her job, but of becoming the kind of person who deserved to be here. If something like this happened to you, how would you react? Let me know your thoughts. Thank you for watching Plow of Twist. If this story moved you, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel. Hit that like button, share this story, and turn on notifications so you never miss another tale that challenges, inspires, and leaves you thinking. Until next time, stay strong, stay vigilant, and always fight for what's right. And please check out this best video playlist.